welcome back to the last session of the GIAN series. I'm going to talk about risk management in smart grids in this session. So this is a preliminary outline for the talk. I'll define risk. What is risk? Risk management, risk planning, different categories of risk in context of smart grid, risk breakdown structure, risk identification, risk register, qualitative risk analysis, and risk response. If you have studied project management before, you'll probably realize that these are the normal steps that you take in managing a risk in any project. So same applies in the context of smart grid as well. So what is risk? A simple definition is a situation involving exposure to danger. So anything that can have any unexpected consequences, not so good consequences, something that is dangerous, there is an element of risk associated with that. A probability or threat of damage, injury, liability, loss, or any other negative occurrence that is caused by external or internal vulnerabilities and that may be avoided through preemptive action. So the first part talks about, further goes into detail of what is risk. So it's a probability or a threat. Probability or threat of damage, injury, liability or loss or any other negative consequence for that matter. So that is, we are talking about in terms of probability here. Risk is the chance of something happening that will have an impact on objectives. So every system that operates in every context, it has some objectives. In context of smart grid, the objective is to make sure that the demand is managed correctly, the price forecasting is proper, load forecasting and so on. So these are the main key objectives for smart grid. So in the context of smart grid, risk would be the chance of something happening that will have an impact on achieving these objectives. Maybe the smart grid fails, the smart meter fails, the generator fails, or anything can fail within the network which can then have a consequence on the objective. Risk that technical experts perceive to be minor often elicit strong public concerns. So there is always people side of risk and the expert side of risk. So experts think that it may not be a risk, but from people's perception, they think it is a risky business. So risk you can consider as a probability and its impact. A relationship between probability and its impact is risk. Now let's talk about risk management. So we know what is risk. We can visualize or we can imagine the amount of risk within the smart grid network. Now that risk has to be managed. So risk management practices should be in place. So what is risk management? Risk management is the identification, analysis, assessment, control and avoidance. So a lot of things. Minimization or elimination of unacceptable risks. So for every process within your network, within the smart grid, you have to analyze that from the perspective of risk. What are the potential risks that might arise because of suddenly generating a large amount of, because of sudden demand in the peak time? Or what could be the risk because of failure of generators or failure of smart meters or failure of gateways. So what would be the all risks emerging because of that? An organization may use risk assumption, risk avoidance, risk retention, transfer, or any other strategy or combination of these strategies in proper management of future events. So sometimes you accept that this risk is going to happen and you accept that when it happens, you accept it. Sometimes there is a situation where you can have a mitigation plan in place. So what are you going to do when that risk happens? What is your solution? How you are going to deal with it? You can also consider how you can avoid such risks. Avoidance is actually better than dealing with it after it has happened. So like prevention is better than cure, same logic. In other words, risk management is the process of identifying, assessing and controlling threats to an organization's operations. It is a systematic application of management policies, procedures and practices to the task of establishing the context, identifying, analyzing, assessing, treating, monitoring and communicating. Even when we discussed about privacy management, there is a risk associated with that as well. What is the risk? The risk is privacy breach. You may have gathered some data, you may have aggregated that data, and that aggregation revealed some patterns which otherwise would not have been revealed. So there is a risk associated with data aggregation, risk associated with data storage, data access, data archival. Each and every aspect of data management, there will be a certain degree of risk. Risk planning. Risk management plan documents the procedures for managing the risk throughout the project. There could be contingency plans, fallback plans and contingency funds or allowances to deal with emergence of risk. So what is a contingency plan? It is an action to be taken when standard risk occurs. Example, increased production is when peak demand hits a benchmark. So when you realize the peak is here, when the demand is going high, when it crosses this particular point, you have to make sure that you kick in more, start more generators to manage that demand. Fallback plans. Action to be taken for risks with high impact. And here it was the risk with standard impact. So high impact, isolate generation and transmission grid in case of a cyber attack. So it is a very high impact risk because the result of that is going to be much more destructive than a standard risk. In the standard risk, in case of this example, what could happen? Some people could not get electricity. Yeah, so that is the level of risk. It is not something creating a big trouble. But if the whole system is attacked, undergoes a cyber attack, it is a very big thing, very big negative impact it will bring. So you have to take some action like isolate transmission distribution so that the cyber attack does not propagate further throughout the network. And contingency funds or allowances are normally set aside if something goes wrong. Yeah, if any risk emerges, risk occurs, then you should have some additional funds to recover from that risk, to make sure that you comply with the risk management plan. So risk management plan is very comprehensive. You can imagine the complexity of the smart grid itself. Yeah, and the complexity of risk from the perspective of lot of things. Yeah, you can have a risk management plan for smart grid's communication network. You can have a risk management plan for demand management. You can have a risk management plan for data security, risk management for privacy. So there will be a very comprehensive assessment of risk for each and every aspect of smart grid. So there is a lot of thought that has to go in when you prepare this plan, because you need to study what are the potential risks that can emerge, what is the likelihood of that risks to happen, what to do when that risk happens, and so on. So the first step would be identifying risks. How do you identify? There are some techniques that you can use for risk identification, such as brainstorming. You can discuss with experts. You can set up a meeting where experts within that particular area can list or suggest these are the potential risks that can occur in this context. Delphi technique is also a type of interviewing technique where you first interview a broad group, then come back, you study their responses, you again go back with some clarifications till you come to a stage where you have pinpointed the actual risks or actual whatever you want to find out. The Delphi technique is not only used for risk, finding out risk, but it is a brainstorming and data analysis technique from interviews. You can do traditional interviews as well, one-on-one interviews. And the output of this process is a risk register. Risk register is a document, all the types of risk 1, risk 2, risk 3 and so on. And it comes from this process of risk identification. So let's look at some examples of risk in smart grids. Unpredictable weather, a very big risk. What if suddenly there are 10-20 days of no sun, it's only raining? It's a big risk. Yeah, it will change the entire equation of the smart grid's power generation. Unprecedented peak demand. Maybe the grid is capable of managing a demand up to this level in the peak time. What if suddenly the demand goes up that high? What do you do in that case? Generator failure, physical attacks on smart meters or the AMI infrastructure, cyber attacks on the same, excessive use of batteries for energy storage, loss of customer data, compromised sensor data, and so on. There could be many risks. Sometimes a perception about risk is negative. Yeah, we always think that risk is something not a good thing. But sometimes there is a concept of positive risks as well. I don't remember whether I have it in the slides or not. But positive risk is something that happens, it gives you a good benefit, but the benefit is such that you cannot manage it. For example, you open a new restaurant, you expect you will get maybe 50 people for dinner, and suddenly you realize there is a long queue outside of 200 people. So it becomes kind of a positive risk. Although you want all of them to come, but you just do not have enough capability or capacity to manage such a thing. Risk can also be categorized in different categories. Like you can have market risk, financial, technological, people, process, and many others. And this gives you an example of some of those risks. If you can, once I give you the copy of the slides, you can zoom it in and you can see it. But it's a good document made by NISA. So let us look at some of these different types of risks. In the category of market risk, there could be high demand is a market type of risk, and there could be some other risks in this category. Financial risk, the price is very high for electrical price. Technology risk, the advanced meter infrastructure may fail. People risk, people may forget password, misplace password, somebody else gets that password, gets access to the network, launches a cyber attack. Process risk, anything within the process line from generation to distribution or consumption, something fails. So, you can come up with a list of risks across all these different risk types, risk categories. So, if you have studied project management before, for managing any project, you do a work breakdown structure, WBS we call it. Similarly, in the context of risk, you can have RBS, which is a risk breakdown structure. So, it's a more structured possible risks across all different categories. Yeah. So, here I have only listed 5, but there may be other risk categories as well, which you can identify and identify the examples or types of risks under that category. Risk register. In the previous slide, this one, identifying risk, we said that the output is a risk register. So, a risk register includes an identification number for each risk. So, you have a risk, you identify that number means that risk. You rank it. Ranking could be depending upon some kind of agreed, like if it is a high risk, then you give it a high rank. If it is a low risk, you give a low rank. So, some mechanism of that sort. The description of that risk, where you list or where you explain. Risk number 1 refers to, and then you explain the failure of the generator or cyber attack on the smart meters, or give a description of that. Then you assign that risk to a category, like we saw in this slide here. Trigger. Trigger means you can identify what is it that can lead for this risk to happen. What is triggering that? So, if you have identified that trigger, you can always keep an eye on that. You know, for example, in case of peak demand, the trigger could be sudden rise in requests from consumers. Yeah, so that is the trigger. Response. Response means once that happens, what action you are going to take. If there is sudden high demand for power, what is your response? Your response is start more generators, get more power from local microgrids or from virtual power plants, what VPP, and so on. So, that is your response. Risk owner. So, this is about accountability. Who is responsible for managing that risk? So, if this happens, I know this person listed here in the risk register should take action. So, that is the risk owner. Probability identifies or lists how likely this risk is going to occur. What is the probability? Probably 0.1 or 10% or 20%, 50%. So, that is a probability index, like some number. And the last one is impact, and that is if this risk does eventually occur, how is that impact going to be? What is that impact going to be? Is it going to be relatively small impact, medium impact, or high impact? And what is the actual impact? Suddenly, maybe if it is peak demand and you cannot meet that demand, the impact would be there will be some people without power, or the voltage might be unstable or something. So, whatever is that impact. And that impact is response related. So, your response should ensure that that impact is minimized or eliminated. Qualitative risk analysis. This is assessing the likelihood and impact of identified risks to determine their magnitude and priority. So a probability impact matrix like the one here can be designed. So you list the impact of a particular risk and you have the probability of that risk happening. Let's put all the risks in this matrix. So for example, risk 9 is a high impact risk and a high probability. So you have to be very careful about this risk because the chances of this happening is high and also the impact is high. On the other hand, if you take an example of risk 8, the probability of its happening is also low and the impact is also marginal. So when you are assigning resources for risk management, this category of risk has to get more resources for handling it. Risk response, risk avoidance, risk acceptance, risk transfer and risk mitigation. So when a risk does occur, whatever one of the things, something goes wrong, the best thing would be if you could avoid it from happening. If we cannot avoid, one thing would be we accept the risk and take some action. Alternatively, we can transfer the risk, so somebody else manages that under their control. Risk has happened and we resolve, take some action like we discussed in the this one. Very limited because most of the research here is talking about project management approach of like project management, risk management as done in project management, following the PMBOK or the project management body of knowledge, and most of the research is about studying the impacts of specific type of risk using the risk management methodology. So for example, mitigating risk of cyber attacks. So this was studied by Rice in 2014. Unified risk management approach. So this paper covers a lot of different aspects of risk from all the different components of smart grid. Managing the risk of uncertainty from the from the generation side or the demand side. Managing charging of electric vehicles. Charging of electric vehicles is also resulting in demand. Yeah. So if there are suddenly hundreds or thousands of electric vehicles charging at the same time, it is a risk for the smart grid. So how to manage that? Blackout risk prevention. What can be done to ensure that blackouts don't happen? If we know the demand is going to be very high and the capacity to address that, capacity for our whole grid is limited, what can we do? So we could optimize, or we could send a signal from the from the utility control station to the consumer saying that please do not use high power appliances. Yeah, so we try to avoid blackout by ensuring that some selective devices, appliances that are consuming a lot of power are temporarily suspended, temporarily stopped, so that the grid does not experience blackout, and as we get more generation on board, we can send another signal saying that okay, now it is fine for you to start using it. Smart grid and electric vehicle risks, both studied in this paper. GIS based simulation model forecast energy demand to change by 2015 to 2016 due to electric vehicle integration in Amsterdam. So this was a study done in Amsterdam, where they did some GIS, geographical information systems based simulation to forecast how the demand will be. And when they did the study, they did not realize that their model will predict that 2015 is the time when they will already expect such a huge variation. And you can see the paper is only published in 2014, and their results say that energy demand will change the very next year. These authors, Zio and Evan, they studied uncertainties in smart grid behavior and did some modeling. There are some other studies as well, risk management studies done by Deloitte and Ramsey in 2011 and 13, and some risk management methodologies like perspective-based approach studied by Yesudas, unified risk management framework for smart grid, for cyber and power security studied by Habash, CPS risk management methodology, asset identification, threat and vulnerability identification, benchmarking security risks. So a lot of research surrounding this is addressing one particular dimension or multiple dimensions of risk at one time. The next I want to talk about today is trust. Trust in smart grid. This is a very small area. There is not a lot of work which has been done in the context of trust in smart grid. Relatively, the work done on risk in smart grid is much more compared to trust in smart grid. So if you want to consider that as an area for your research, is a good topic as well. So let's start with a definition. A firm belief in the reliability, truth, or ability of someone or something. That is trust. Trust is context dependent, dynamic, and non-monotonic. What does that mean? You can trust someone in some context, but not in other context. Yeah, so trust is very context dependent. For control systems, we define trust as our confidence that during some specific interval, the appropriate user is accessing accurate data created by the right device at the expected location at the proper time, communicated using the expected protocol, and that the data hasn't been modified. So you can see what all is involved when we refer to trust in control systems. So we define trust as the confidence. So firstly, confidence, and that confidence is during a specific interval. So it has a time nature or time dependent. So something that might be trusted in this time context may not be in the next. So authorized authenticated user assessing accurate data created by the right device, because we need, I think I mentioned in one of the talks, I don't recall, that the data that the smart meter sends to the utility believes that that data is the real data. It relies on that information. So it basically trusts the information coming from the smart meter and going to the utility. So that is described, that is referred to here with the term right device. At the expected location, at the proper time, and it is communicated using the expected protocol. So there are a lot of parameters that are thought about when we define trusted control systems. So why is there a need for trust? Can we manage without? It's the first question that comes to our mind. Why we need to even think about it? trust makes because why we need this? Because decision making is a challenging task. It needs to be done in a limited time, has to rely on large information sources using limited computing resources. So, decision making has these challenges, and this suddenly becomes easy. Trust the information coming from the smart meter, I can make my decisions based upon that trusted data. I don't have to worry about privacy, I don't have to worry about security, I don't have to worry about consistency, reliability. I just trust that information. And because I trust that, a lot of processing is taken out of the equation. I can just do and rely on this information and trust it and process that. And faster. There are many different types of trust classification systems. Not all have been such as blind trust. You blindly trust someone because of some reason. You know them, or you know the system, you rely on that system, you have used that system in the past, so you have a blind trust. There is reputation based trust. Reputation means over the past few times, whenever you have had an interaction with this entity, you had a good experience, you were not cheated. So, you gradually believe and you gradually trust that source of information. Yeah, so you are building up a reputation. Control and punishment based trust. This is based upon control. So, because people have the fear that they would ensure that they so there are models based upon that as well. And there are policy based trust. This is implemented a lot on e-commerce sites for ensuring trust between different users. Like when you buy something online on Amazon, you always look at the rating of that seller or of the other buyers, or what is that? That is showing the reputation, and you are using that reputation to build some sort of trust to make an order, to purchase something from a person or a company whom you have never seen or never met. So, what I found was just a few papers that discuss in the context of smart grid. So, I mentioned them here. Trust-based reliable transmission strategies for smart home energy consumption management in cognitive radio-based smart grids. It was one paper. Dynamic trust elective geo-routing to secure smart grid communication. So, here trust is used for in the communication context. Here trust is used in the energy management system context. Trust is used for attack protection. Trust and reputation both are used. I also found a paper on SCADA trust management system as well. Collaborative trust-based security mechanisms for regional utility intranet. So this paper and this paper, they were dealing with, actually these three papers dealing with security and trust. So like I said, research on trust is still very limited, and which gives you a lot of opportunities if you want. There is a very thorough literature on trust in other contexts, other sectors such as e-commerce, on the web, or other other websites on the internet, where you rely on many of the trust-based algorithms for online transactions, online purchases, and so on. So there is a good option probably to study some of these methods and see how they can be applied for smart grids in the smart grid context. So I think, yeah, that brings us to the conclusion for this, the last and final session of smart grids. And we covered two very important topics here. One is risk management and second is trust management. Both are equally important and address very relevant problems within this large network of smart grids. So follow the traditional project management methodology for risk management. We identify risks, we assign risk, we rank the risk, we assign the impact, and basically design the complete risk register. We can do it for different categories of risk. You can have a risk management plan for one category of risk and for the other categories of risk. In the context of trust models in smart grids, the research has been very limited. I have identified some work that you can use it as a starting point, and then you can see if that area is of interest to you, and we can explore that together. Okay, thanks a lot, and I think it was a very exciting journey over the last 10 days to go through smart grids with all of you, and I hope you learned a lot, and I learned a lot from you as well during the sessions and also in the labs and in the tutorial sessions. So thank you once again. Thanks a lot.